Hello all, this is Peter Zepeda, and this is a presentation for the medieval history class for Lewis Clark State College. So this is my presentation, and I will be doing my project on the Reconquista and the religions and interactions of religions in Spain. These are my sources that I've looked at so far. A couple of them, Joseph O'Callahan and Gabriel Jackson, are both known Hispanicist historians, and they go very much in depth. Callahan, much more than Gabriel Jackson. His book is much larger and covers almost everything, but in this case, I'm just going to look at mostly religious stuff. Malinva McKendrick is also very similar to Gabriel Jackson, but instead of just focusing on medieval history, she goes on a much broader scale. But the information, the length is very similar to that of Gabriel Jackson's. And Eleanor Yanega, of course, if you've taken this class, you have read it. And there are certain parts of that book that covers a little bit of the Reconquista. So to start off, I'm going to do a little background about Visigoth Spain. Spain was settled by the Visigoths at the fall of Rome as a Germanic tribe. And their political center for politics and religious purposes was Toledo. And this is where there would be a bishop there, and he very much covered all of Spain. It's also interesting that they were Arians. The Arian heresy took off in Spain, but the Visigoth king would eventually convert back to Catholicism. But in 711, the Muslims conquered Spain, and they were set off a caliphate in the city of Cordoba, and that would become another large city in medieval Spain. They were ruled by the Umayyads. The Umayyads actually were first based in Damascus and had a large empire, but after they were defeated by the Abbasids, the Umayyad leader escaped and ended up setting his political center in Cordoba, Spain, and this actually stabilized Muslim rule in Spain. The Muslims in this area in Spain, known as Al-Andalus, embrace this tradition within Islam called Malikite. It's named after a Malik, a Islamic jurist, and it was very anti-philosophical and was against religious speculations. And for this reason, philosophy never really actually flourished among the arts of Islamic Spain. Among one of their buildings they built was the Great Mosque, as you can see with these arches. And another interesting point is that they also conquered this area called Rioja. And despite Islamic rule, they still grew wine there, and to this day, Rioja is known for wine. But Rioja actually that particular region kept a Christian majority and an Islamic minority. So, as though the Umayyads and the Muslims conquered most of Spain, there was one region in the north known as Asturias, and there's a kingdom there that remained unconquered. Over during the time there was the Moslem Arab Christians, and they, even though under Islamic rule, due to the very tolerant Umayyad rule, the Visigoth Moslem Arab Rite continued to exist. However, they did have to pay special taxes, and this caused revolts, and sort of a lot of times after these revolts, a lot of Moslem Arabs would convert into Islam. Although the Umayyads did not end up lasting forever, political sort of strife after weak rule of their caliphs, which ended up breaking the Umayyads into several tiafas, or these rival Islamic kingdoms, while in northern Africa, this new caliph sort of reemerged, the Almoravids, named after one of the nobles within the Umayyads. The Almoravids, though, were fairly intolerant and were very indifferent of the Andalusian culture. So to show you here, I have a map, and with all these green, there are several different Tiafa kingdoms. And of course, in the north, you see these Christian kingdoms emerging and getting larger. The most notable is Castile and Leon. And then there's the Kingdom of Navarra, Aragon, and Aragon that would become very influential. But there's several tiafas, and you still have one in Cordoba. You have a special one in Toledo, which was another center that I've spoke of earlier, and Seville. This would actually bring on a very interesting situation within Spain. Eventually, though, we see changes within Spain as well. So this adoptism controversy broke out, and this was very similar to that of the Arian heresy. And because of this, Alfonso II of Castile became ecclesiastical independent of the Bishop of Toledo. But later, you would see Cluniac monasteries. There's a monastery order from France showing up in the Catalan, eventually the King of Castile and Navarra, where they were actually joined in one kingdom at the time, invited the Cluniac monks into his kingdom. And later Cistercian monasteries followed. And this is actually a huge deal, because this is bringing in a Latin Christian tradition into a tradition that was Visigoth. It was not Latin. It was not connected ecclesiastical traditions with the rest of much of Western Europe. And we see one of these monasteries at Montserrat. And this is I believe, a Cluniac monastery. This is in the Catalonia region. Another thing happened during this time, and in the High Middle Ages, while Spain undergoed all this reform within its Christian tradition, we also see the popularity of a pilgrimage within Spain to Santiago de Compostela, this cathedral in the region of Galicia in western Spain, and the pilgrimage taken from Toulouse to Santiago, still very popular today. This is believed to where the relics of Saint James, the disciple of Jesus, is located. And because Christians often were barred from going to the Holy Land, this became a popular alternative. Here we see the cathedral here, the Roman-esque cathedral. This is the inside of it, and this is the outside. There's also a third religious group within medieval Spain, and that was the Jews. And just like Jews elsewhere within medieval Europe, they often took part in baking, loans, and they would take part in artisan crafts. They were acted as intermediary. They conversed with both Christians and Muslims. They were tolerated by the Umayyads, but with the Almoravids and the Almohad caliphates, they became not so tolerated, and in fact, a lot of them would actually move to Christian kingdoms in the north because the Christians at that time were much more tolerant. Of course, that would change over time, and by 1492, when Spain was all conquered, the Jews would often be forced to convert or be expelled. One of the great things that the Jews ended up doing was that they actually translated the Torah, the Old Testament, from Hebrew into Castilian. And this is very important to the Visigoth Rite. One of the reasons why the Latin Rite ended up actually taking off in Spain and replacing the Visigoth Rite was that the lack of scripture, in the loss of scripture into the languages. But the Visigoth was able to sort of remain because of this, because of the Jews who actually translated the Old Testament into Castilian. So these are the questions I'm looking at for my project. The main one is, what is the lasting impact of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Spain? And what's the sort of unique things about Islamic Spain in the Al-Andalus? And how did Christianity change and reform within Spain itself? This concludes my presentation. Thank you.